Okay, let's cover Adele. Adele is a pretty fun Flora warrior with good mobility, lots of positioning tools, and a crazy versatile kit for bossing. She's also got good grinding potential, with not only her flying swords, but also all her other various toggles and summons that attack all around her, doing damage near constantly. I'm kinda surprised so many people wanted me to cover Adele, but looking at her kit, yeah, I get why. So let's start by explaining all them skills. Over in the beginner skills, magic conversion is just a nice little passive, taking any magic attack you have across your equips that isn't on your weapon, and converts 35% of it to attack. It also caps off at 15% of your currently equipped weapon's base attack power. You also get Recalling Greatness, which passively gives crit damage and attack power every time it levels up. You level it up by progressing through the Adele job quests, with the last quest being at level 200. Lastly, Adele's Link skill, Noble Fire, gives 6% boss damage when you're soloing, and increasing by an extra 2% for every additional party member, up to a cap of 8%, including yourself. It's an okay Link skill, but nothing to write home about really. Moving on, First Job gives this basic mobbing skill that just does a singular slash in front of you, this big ol' passive that gives just tons of various stats, and a very basic flash jump that also has an up jump tacked onto it. You get even more mobility through High Rise, which suspends you in the air from wherever you used it. You can do this either by clicking the skill itself, or by pressing up twice in a row. If you don't like the double tapping up feature, you can right click to disable it. And you can also chain a flash jump or up jump after High Rise. Not the other way around though, no cooldown. Lastly, Magic Dispatch makes magical shards that seek down nearby enemies, 6-second cooldown. Second Job gives you an additional, more automatic version of Magic Dispatch, called Ethereal Arms. Toggle it on, and whenever you use a trigger skill on an enemy, more magic shards fly out and act the exact same as the ones from Magic Dispatch. 8-second cooldown in between shard creations, and 0.5-second cooldown for toggling the skill on. That part's not really important. Anyways, what's a trigger skill? Basically all your main mobbing skills you'll get from here on out, with one additional exception later on at 4th Job, starting with Skewering. Yep, just a basic mobbing skill poking in front of you all greenly. There's also this attack speed boosting buff, and a few passives for Mastery, Strength, and this one that restores a bunch of health and mana every 5 seconds. Ending off Second Job skills, we got 5 skills that all kinda chain into each other. First, Aether Forge is another toggle that makes Aether Swords attack nearby enemies alongside your trigger skills. Currently, there's a 9.5-second cooldown in between Forge activations, and that goes down by 4 seconds at both 3rd and 4th Job, bringing it down to a 1.5-second cooldown by then. Forge also says it attacks 1 times per Aether Sword, and you get Aether Swords through Aether Weaving. Weaving generates 5 Aether periodically, or 12 when trigger skills hit enemies, up to a cap of 300 Aether. Every 100 Aether gives you 2 swords through Forge, up to 4 total swords. Aether Crystal is a passive that makes up to 7 of these crystals appear around maps, either automatically at a 30% chance through Forge, or manually through Impale. You can send it forward a set distance in 8 directions, at the cost of some Aether and mana, 7-second cooldown. Okay, but what can you even do with Aether Crystals? Fly right to their location with Resonance Rush. You can also use this skill in the same 8 directions, and when you pass through enemies, they take damage, and you get a 30-second buff that gives you final damage and IED. Once you rush to an Aether Crystal, it gets consumed and goes away. No cooldown on Rush, so feel free to use it as much as you want, or even float with High Rise right after. Third Job is a little less involved than second, but still has a bunch of good useful things. First, another trigger basic mobbing skill, and a couple passives boosting some various stats, including damage for your previous job skills. Feather Float sends you flying slightly up and backwards a short distance, costing some Aether. It has a slight delay before going through with the movement, and you can use it while using any of your various trigger skills, with an exception to Plummet. You get that at 4th Job. Moving on, Reign of Destruction drops a bunch of gigantic swords in an area in front of you. At the very end, it does one final bigger burst of damage. 7-second duration, 30-second cooldown. True Nobility is a party buff that acts as a giant bubble for you and all party members within it, which lets you tank some damage for them. You'll soak up 30% of their damage taken, and give them a shield equal to 80% of that damage. The one exception to this while it's active is if they were to take more damage greater than their remaining health. In that case, they just take the damage instead. 20-second duration, 3-minute cooldown. Lastly, 2 new attacks that work with each other. Hunting Decree summons swords flying around the map at enemies indiscriminately for 40 seconds each. You can have up to 4 out at a time, and each one costs 100 Aether to spawn. If you move too far away from the sword, it'll come back to orbiting around your general area. Each sword also has a 15% chance to generate an Aether Crystal. You can control these flying swords, kind of, through noble summons, which makes all Aether swords that are currently out and about fly in a straight line right to you. If they pass through any enemies on the way back, they take damage, and debuff said enemies with 10% less defense for 30 seconds. Also, this skill has a 90% chance to generate Aether Crystals, 12-second cooldown. Oh hey, look at that! Plummet's also a trigger skill, told ya. Fourth Job gives you your first and only trigger skill that's not a basic mobbing skill, Plummet. All it does is send you downwards, damaging enemies beneath you. Not as fast as Ho-Young's, but still considerably quickly, 1.5-second cooldown. You also get an upgrade to your Aether gauge, making it bigger and letting you generate more Aether swords for both Forge and Decree, as well as all these other passives for all kinds of various stats, including this one for previous job skill damage upgrades. Oh, and yep, of course Maple Warrior and Hero's Will are also here, as well as your fourth and final basic attacking skill, Cleave. This is your main spammable attack you'll be using throughout everything you do. And of course it's also a trigger skill. Hunting Decree gets a kind of upgrade through another controlling skill used with it, called Aether Bloom. All this does is make all your swords spin at their current location, doing a whole bunch more damage to enemies hit by it. It specifies that swords that return through noble summons can't bloom, but I don't think that's true. I think it more so means you can't cast both at the same time. Subsequent hits on the same enemy do 25% less final damage, and it also has a 50% chance to generate Aether Crystals. 20-second cooldown. Aether Guard is simply a skill you can hold up to 8 seconds, and it reduces your damage taken. However, if you use Aether Guard right as you take damage, it instead acts as a kind of iframe, nullifying initial damage, and reducing even more while still holding down the key. 1-minute cooldown, going down to 3.5 seconds for every remaining second you didn't hold down this skill. Lastly, finally, Grave Proclamation marks one enemy, making them the focus for all your flying swords to attack. In addition, it also gives 10% IED on whichever enemy you've marked. 10-second cooldown, and the mark only goes away if you die. Otherwise, it lasts forever. Enough chit-chat, let's talk hyper skills. Blade Torrent is Adele's class bind, just stunning enemies in its area for 10 seconds, and dealing a little bit of damage. 3-minute cooldown. Divine Wrath is the epic adventure equivalent for Adele, giving 10% damage to you and all other Flora classes in your party, like Ilium, Kali, and Arc. 1-minute uptime, 2-minute cooldown. Lastly for hyper skills, Shardbreaker makes shards in the area right in front of you, dealing damage on up to 7 enemies from both the shard creation and the resulting shatter right after. If there's less than 7 enemies hit by it, it makes the remaining shards in random locations around you. If it's used on an enemy that's marked with Grave Proclamation, it focuses half the total shards on them instead, and deals slightly more damage. Once the attack goes through and the shards shatter, it can spawn up to 7 Aether Crystals. Doesn't say at what chance they can spawn though. 1-minute cooldown. Hyper passives are all mostly generally pretty good, yet Adele mains seem to recommend taking nearly everything utility focused over the ones that give damage. Take for example these first 3 for trigger skills. Damage, IED, and boss damage. They're all typically pretty good, especially since you spam a trigger skill often. Right? Get none of them. Honestly, Reinforce and Boss Rush are not bad options whatsoever for extra damage. I'd consider them at least if you don't agree with the optimal Adele hyper passive layout that the Adele Discord provides. Guard Break just usually isn't all that great for any class. That's really the only hyper passive in Adele's whole kit I'd recommend not getting. Moving on, from here on out, it is all utility. Resonance Rush Efficiency gives you bonus Aether when you rush to an Aether Crystal, as well as makes Impale consume no Aether, so even more Aether for you to use. Pretty useful. Reign of Destruction Persist makes that giant sword field skill last 4 seconds longer. It does some heavy damage, so increasing its uptime by a little over half of what it currently is, pretty good too. Aether Bloom Cooldown Cutter brings your Aether Bloom cooldown down to like 13-14 seconds. It's another skill that does high damage, especially in bosses, so it's worth considering as well. Will to Live Aura Reinforce nearly doubles the healing you get from Second Job's Will to Live passive. It's decent, but there's better options. True Nobility Shield Reinforce gives you a 15% damage increase when you pop your green party bubble. This one is fairly good, but I'd argue against it personally in favor of one of the trigger skill upgrades. The Adele Discord says they're pretty similar in terms of output overall, but since it focuses True Nobility more so for your burst, it's still kinda worth it. Lastly, Aether Guard Persist makes your Aether Guard able to be held up to 2 seconds longer for a total of 10 seconds. For bossing, this is a useful defensive option, but again in my own personal opinion, arguably optional. These are the 5 that the Adele Discord swears by, and these are my personal 5 that just feels right to me. There are no wrong answers, do what you feel works best. I hope you like swords, because that's what most of Adele's 5th job is. Starting off big, Infinity Blade makes a whole bunch more swords flying around at enemies, 18 to be exact. They act pretty much the same as your normal Aether swords, though can only be commanded through Grave Proclamation, meaning you can't control them using Aether Bloom or Noble Summons. Additionally, each attack they do also has a 5% chance to spawn Aether Crystals, and you get an iframe both when you initially cast the skill and when it ends. 3-minute cooldown. Ruin drops a giant sword right on top of you, hitting pretty vertically high. All it does is 2 separate big bursts of damage. Pretty simple to understand. 1-minute cooldown. Storm takes all your existing Aether swords, only the ones created through Hunting Decree, not Infinity Blade, and swirls them around you, dealing damage in your general area. During the skill, the amount of attacks it does is entirely dependent on how many stacks of Hunting Decree you have, so it can potentially go up to 6 lines of damage. 14-second duration, 90-second cooldown. Legacy Restoration gives you a bunch more damage and Aether generation, as well as lets you cast 2 more Aether Swords at the cost of draining 2% of your mana every second throughout its whole 30-second duration. And yes, if you were wondering, those 2 extra Aether Swords do work with Storm, giving you a total of 8 lines of damage through that skill. It's not 6, it's 8. See, I lied, I'm a liar. In addition to all them buffs, it also does damage to nearby enemies throughout its duration, and even restores a percentage of health to you and all other party members. 30-second duration, 3-minute cooldown. Shared skills gives some pretty good buffs. Let's start with the floral ones. Conversion Overdrive gives you a damage buff, which depends on how much mana you have when you initially cast it. It also keeps resetting every time Spellstorm occurs. Spellstorm is a new attack that happens during Conversion Overdrive, and it simply just attacks nearby enemies every 4 seconds throughout this skill's duration, which goes from 31 seconds at level 1 up to 1 whole minute at max level. 2-minute cooldown. Grandest Goddess's Blessing for Flora classes converts some of your magic attack into attack power, up to a cap of 150% your weapon's base attack power. Kinda similar to the magic conversion skill you got as a beginner. It also gives some flat attack and magic attack. 40-second duration, 2-minute cooldown. Now the Warrior shared skills. Weapon Aura builds up 1 charge every 3 minutes, up to 2 charges, and does a couple things. The first one being an IED and final damage buff throughout its whole duration. The second being a wave of damage that shoots out from you every 5 seconds and travels horizontally forward, damaging everything in its path. Ending off 5th job for Adele, Impenetrable Skin gives you super stance, some flat status resistance, and increases your damage every time you get hit, up to a certain amount of times depending on the level of the skill. At level 1, it stacks up to 3 times, and at max level, it stacks up to 6. It also passively gives some flat strength and max health. 2-minute cooldown. Adele on the surface seems overly complicated with a ton of shorter cooldown skills, skills that keep chaining into each other to be useful, and a player base that mostly acts like she's one of the hardest classes you could possibly play. It also doesn't help that a lot of her skills have tons of text that's mostly complete nonsense. In actuality though, she is not really complicated at all. I'll show you all by making her easy. You get a lot of mobility options as an Adele, and a lot of them have practical uses to them, either for positioning or for quickly getting to other areas of a map. Let's start with Feather Float. On its own, it acts like a teleport, sending you diagonally backwards. Once it's used, you can chain your flash jump, up jump, or even float through high rise or blink right after it. From there, you can even chain into your other Aether Crystal-centric skills, like Impale and Resonance Rush, for even more airtime, and vice versa. If you needed to get back down to the ground quickly, either from being too high up or to avoid certain attacks, don't forget about Plummet. The only real exception to any of these is the cooldown for Impale and Feather Float, and the fact that you can only use one up jump or flash jump every new time you jump from the ground. It seems fairly unimportant, but once you get comfortable with all these mobility skills, you'll be adapting and reacting to situations much easier. Remember this skill back from beginners, Recalling Greatness? That's a nice little bump in passive attack and crit damage. Max it out to level 10. Finish up them class quests for free damage. Adele is one of those classes that absolutely litters their hotkeys with skills, a lot of which have shorter cooldowns or ones you'll want to use often, but also a lot that you'll only ever really use while bossing. If it's overwhelming you that badly, you could make a separate preset for grinding and just bind anything essential, like Urda Fountain, your toggles, Cleave obviously, Hunting Decree, and whatever else you find useful. Those 5 are good enough to clear out most maps pretty comfortably. You could also toss a lot of your burst buttons into your combo keys to declutter it even further. Obviously, once you get more comfortable and familiar with the class, this won't be as much of an issue, but if it's information overload for you early on, there's no shame in stripping away all them other buttons until you figure them out. For grinding, get enough Aether Swords out through Hunting Decree, place down Urda Fountain, and come back to the game in 8 to 10 business days. In all seriousness, Adele is a pretty comfy class for grinding. They aren't as easy as just summoning Decree and calling it a day, but Decree does help clean up the area around you pretty damn well. In conjunction with Ethereal Arms, Aether Forge and Urda Fountain, plus Soul Janus at 6th job, Adele's got it pretty comfy and easy. You'll still have to toss out an occasional cleave just to keep the attacks going along though, but it's still pretty low effort. For bossing, make sure to always mark the boss with Grave Proclamation. It never goes away until said boss is dead, so you don't even have to cast it more than once in a boss fight per phase theoretically. But if you die, you'll have to reapply it. That's not a huge deal though, it's got a short cooldown and all that. Now all your Hunting Decrees, Magic Dispatches, Ethereal Arms, and Shardbreaker attacks will focus on said boss, regardless of however many other enemies are stinking up the place around you. If you're looking to maximize your damage as much as you possibly can, remember to cast Magic Dispatch every time it's off cooldown. Additionally, use Resonance Rush often to refresh that huge 30-second final damage naive debuff. Pretty much use it whenever you can, just to ensure you're obliterating bosses as often as you can. Optimally, you'd want to keep your Aether Gauge pretty full and available to use for as long as possible before resummoning the swords, because you can hold up to 4 charges of them anyways. On that note, I'd suggest putting Hunting Decree on the buff favorites window to monitor how many stacks you currently have with that. Beyond all that, once you pop Legacy Restoration into Storm, yeah, just pretty much press every other attacking skill you got, and there's your burst on Adele. Also cast Bloom as often as you can, because that's a massive part of your damage. I'll get into more of the specifics later in the burst/BA section. Even if Aether Guard isn't a true iframe, and even still pretty useful for reducing damage taken, it isn't the only option Adele has for defenses. There's also all the passive damage reducers, and the passive that heals every 5 seconds. Though, Infinity Blade is their only dedicated iframe both at the start and end of the skill, until you get your Origin skill at 6th job. Additionally, Adele also has a little bit of useful support skills for parties. Their bubble, True Nobility, can either be used as a burst-centric skill if you get the hyper passive for it, or as defense and a shield for your whole party. Similarly, Legacy Restoration gives a big ol' damage buff, the extra Aether Swords I mentioned, and, party-wise, occasionally heals your whole party for a percentage of their max health. It's not a whole lot of support, but it's something useful. Cooldown hats will be pretty useful and important for Adele's very soon. As of right now, they're pretty similar in DPM output, but only because both Aether Bloom and Noble Summons aren't boosted in 6th job. But when the next update hits GMS, real soon, both of them will be boosted, and you'll want to invest in getting a cooldown hat. Ideally, a -4 second cooldown hat would be best, but even a -2 second hat will help about equally as much, if not more, than just a pure % strength hat. In addition to Bloom and Noble Summons cooldowns being reduced, it also lowers the cooldowns of Feather Float, Impale, Shardbreaker, Aether Guard, Ruin, Grave Proclamation, and Reign of Destruction. Pretty much anything with a cooldown, but most importantly all your bigger attacks with shortish cooldowns, like Bloom. Link skills are for grinding, the typical Evan, Mercedes, and Aran for longer rune duration, flat XP, and extra combo orb XP respectively. Need more damage? Lar Link helps specifically with normal monsters while grinding. The rest of the gaps can be filled in with whatever else you feel would suit you best damage-wise. Some layout like this is fine. For bossing, damage increasing everything, especially if it increases boss damage. Both the demon classes, Kana, Luminous, Arc's Solus, obviously AB Link for big damage every minute or so too. Maybe Mojuan's Link, since it seems pretty good for bossing. Kadena and Explorer Thief's links for debuffed enemy damage. Lin 2, which also helps with Adele's naturally low crit rate. If you absolutely needed more crit rate, by the way, there's no shame in tossing on some other crit increasing link skills, like Phantoms or Explorer Archer's links, until you can fill the gaps in later through Legion Grid, blocks, and artifacts. Also decent Sharp Eyes if you aren't using that yet. A layout like this works well enough. It even pairs nicely with a light drizzle of resistance link right on top for 8 whole seconds of invincibility every time you revive in a boss fight. Delicious. Inner ability is a bit of an odd one when it comes to the bossing preset, but makes enough sense. First, let's get the grinding one out of the way. The usual drop, meso, and normal monster damage. Okay, for bossing, as of right now, first line you'll want boss damage for extra damage in boss fights, and second and third lines you'll want buff duration for a longer AB link, and abnormal status damage for extra damage when you debuff a boss, which you'll be doing pretty much permanently via Grave Proclamation. So this is a good, fairly basic one, easy to explain. Later on, presumably when we get the next update, Adele gets new masteries at 6th job. More specifically for Forge and Rain, both of which can have their cooldowns skipped entirely, and if/when they do, that's real big extra damage. The damage boosts both these skills get justifies at least considering swapping their bossing IA to instead have cooldown skip first line, with second and third lines being any mix of buff duration, boss damage, or abnormal status damage. Dispatch's cooldown can also be skipped. Trinodes are a little weird for Adele. You have 10 total to choose from, and you'll want to boost everything that isn't the basic mobbing skills at 1st through 3rd job, leaving an odd number of 7 skills to boost. Almost every single one of these boosts other skills too. Magic Dispatch, which also boosts Ethereal Arms, Impale, which also boosts both Resonance Rush and Shardbreaker, Aether Forge, which also boosts Noble Summons, Reign of Destruction, which also boosts Plummet, Hunting Decree, which also boosts Grave Proclamation, Aether Bloom, which also boosts Blade Torrent, and Cleave, which boosts nothing else. Jeez, that's a lot of skills. From what I've researched and also been told, there's no particular ones to boost over others here, meaning there's no definitive bossing and grinding Trinodes. You'll apparently just want to boost them all equally when you can. If you had to though, I'd say consider at least this one for grinding, to make grinding out the early game a bit more bearable. Cleave, Aether Forge, and Hunting Decree. Hunting Decree's flying swords clean up the map damn well. Forge is good for doing nearby damage every couple seconds, and Cleave to, well, proc both those into attacking around you, and just doing damage with a spammable mobbing skill. Aether Bloom, Impale, Magic Dispatch, and Reign of Destruction I'd say are all more geared towards bossing, even if they all do have their uses while grinding. An optimal layout would boost all 7 of these skills across 5 total Trinodes, with 1 leftover random skill to boost that won't really matter much, it'll just be one of your previous job's mobbing skills. For Burst/BA, prepare yourself. You'll want to make sure both your toggles are on, you got 6 stacks of Hunting Decree out and attacking, and of course all your buffs are up and active. your attack speed boosting one, and whichever of your decent skills you have and or want to use. When you do have 6 decree stacks, fill up your gauge yet again, because you'll be using it. Next, make sure the boss is debuffed with Grave Proclamation. You only need to mark them once, so this can be done whenever. You'll also want the boss debuffed with Resonance Rush, which can be done at any point, just so long as it lasts throughout your burst. Now, pop Weapon Aura, Divine Wrath and Conversion Overdrive, Will Skill if you have it, and toss down Rain of Destruction. I don't think the order of this first chunk really matters too much, beyond it ending with Rain of Destruction. After Rain's been used, pop Legacy Restoration, Hunting Decree again for 8 stacks, Grandest Goddess's Blessing, True Nobility if you got the hyper passive that gives it damage, and then Noble Summons to have all your swords close in on you, and then immediately chain that into Aether Bloom. From here, you'll want to pop Storm and Infinity Blade, AB Link, Ruin, Shardbreaker, and then spam Cleave and Magic Dispatch every time they're both off cooldown together. Same with Noble Summons in Bloom, Rain of Destruction, and Resonance Rush every 30 seconds or so. That's a lot of skills. Let's shorten it down and simplify it a bit. The only thing you need to keep in mind really is making sure you have 8 stacks of Decree before popping Storm, and then buff up and pop pretty much everything in your kit that does damage. The order of all this probably matters once you get into the later game stages of Maple, but I'm just here to make classes easier to play. Anyways, at 6th job, you'll want to use your origins somewhere around after casting Shardbreaker, and your off burst will just consist of spamming Cleave, keeping the boss debuffed with Resonance Rush, and using all your shorter cooldown skills when they become available. Some people like to believe this class is very technical with all their happy feats and wombo combos, but the longer you play them, the more you'll come to understand they're pretty simple, even for their burst. When I rejoined Maple back in 2021, I used to see a ton of Adeles in pretty much every map imaginable, and Kana's too, of course. That's the opposite case nowadays. I barely see Adeles anymore, and I want to say a large part of it is due to Aether Guard, their damage reduction skill, being wildly changed. It used to be an iframe when you perfectly timed it against enemies, and its hyper passive used to extend that iframe time. Now it's just nullifying 1 hit of damage and reducing further damage past that. Thankfully, it's going back to its roots as being just an iframe sometime in the near future, when that one update comes over to GMS giving every class their own iframe, so that's kinda cool. Beyond their defensive capabilities, Adele is a fun, fairly mobile class with pretty skills and a wicked nice summon. I love them flying swords. This class deserves way more love than I see them get nowadays. Thanks to my friends Kat and Radori for helping me with a lot of the bones of this guide, helping me understand Adele at large, and explaining pretty much anything I was curious about. Also thanks to the Adele Discord for cross-referencing purposes, just covering my tracks and tidying up anything I might have missed. If there's other classes you'd like to see me go over next, leave some suggestions down in the comments. If you just want to see more videos from me about anything Maple related as soon as they come out, consider subscribing to the channel. I initially had another class in mind for my next guide instead of Adele, and a bunch of people wanted me to cover them, and I always wanted to learn more about them. I may not be the best at this class, but it sure is fun just having them flying swords rip through everything on the map. That's all.